Your soul has lived before and it remembers. What if the line between life and death is a bit more blurry than we've been told? What if a soul could carry the echoes of a past life into a new one? For most of us, that's pure science fiction. But for one family in Louisiana, it became their undeniable truth, forcing them to rethink everything they believed about life, death, and what comes next. This story doesn't start with a mystical vision or a wise guru. It starts with a toddler's blood-curdling screams in the dark of night. Imagine your 2-year-old son starts waking up from horrific nightmares, screaming, "Airplane crash on fire! Little man can't get out!" Suddenly, this is the new reality for Bruce and Andrea Leininger. At first, they were just worried parents, trying to soothe what seemed like terrible dreams. But then, their son, James, started talking. He shared details he had no way of knowing. He said his plane was a Corsair, that the Japanese had shot it down, and that he'd flown off a boat named the Natoma. This is the true story of how one family's desperate search for answers led them to what some believe is the most compelling evidence for reincarnation ever found. Section 1. The Mystery. For Bruce and Andrea Leininger, life was perfectly normal, until it wasn't. Right around his 2nd birthday, their son James started having nightmares, and they were violent. Several times a week, he'd wake up thrashing, kicking his legs as if he were trapped inside an invisible, burning coffin. The words were always the same. "Airplane crash on fire! Little man can't get out!" His parents were, understandably, freaked out. His playtime wasn't innocent anymore. He would obsessively smash his toy planes into the coffee table, again and again. He knew things about World War II airplanes that a toddler just shouldn't know. On what should have been a fun trip to a flight museum, 2-year-old James was completely captivated. He walked around a vintage plane, doing what his dad could only describe as a pilot's pre-flight check, as if he'd done it 1,000 times before. Bruce and Andrea tried to find a logical reason. Maybe he saw a documentary on TV, but the sheer terror in his eyes and the precision of his knowledge felt like something else entirely. James wasn't just playing. He seemed to be reliving a trauma. As devout Christians, his parents found the whole thing deeply unsettling. The idea of a past life wasn't just foreign. It was against their entire belief system. They had no idea they were at the start of a journey that would challenge their faith and their very sense of reality. Section 2. The investigation begins. So what turns a worried parent into a full-blown detective? It started with a suggestion from Andrea's mother. Maybe James was remembering a past life. Bruce, a man of deep Christian faith, immediately shut the idea down. But Andrea was desperate to ease her son's terror. She picked up a book by past life therapist Carol Bowman, which described kids with similar stories. The book proposed that these weren't just memories, but a kind of post-traumatic stress from a former life, and that acknowledging them might help the child heal. Willing to try anything, Andrea put the advice to the test. The next time James woke up screaming, she soothed him, saying, "I know you were a pilot and your plane crashed, but you're safe now." The nightmares didn't stop, but they did become less frequent, less intense. Encouraged, she and Bruce started listening, really listening, to what James was saying when he was awake. Bruce was still a huge skeptic, but he was also a man who dealt in facts. He began to write down every single thing his son said. If it was all a fantasy, he'd prove it. If it was real, he had to understand it. They asked gentle questions, and the answers were mind-blowing. James told them he flew a Corsair and that it always got flat tires. He said he flew off a ship he called the Natoma. One day, James mentioned that his little man, the pilot he used to be, was also named James. Each new clue was a puzzle piece, and it pulled Bruce from his role as a skeptic into the role of lead investigator. Section 3. Unbelievable details emerge. With a growing list of his son's statements, Bruce Leininger went full-on detective, diving into historical records to prove or disprove what James was saying. These weren't vague feelings. These were specific, testable facts. First, the plane. James insisted it was a Corsair. He also knew that Corsairs tended to drift left during takeoff and often blew tires on landing. Details Bruce confirmed were well known among World War II aviators. Next, the ship's name, Natoma. Bruce hit the books, searching World War II naval records. He eventually struck gold. An escort carrier named the USS Natoma Bay had served in the Pacific and fought in the Battle of Iwo Jima. This was the first solid piece of proof, a direct link between his son's strange words and actual history. But the real bombshells were still to come. James started drawing intense pictures of planes on fire, signing them James 3. He explained to his dad that he was the third James. He also mentioned a friend who was with him when he died. When Bruce asked his name, James replied, Jack Larson. Armed with the ship's name and a pilot's name, Bruce's investigation went into overdrive. He went to a reunion for veterans of the USS Natoma Bay. It was there he learned that only one pilot from that carrier was killed during the Iwo Jima operation, a man named James M. Houston, Jr. His plane was hit by Japanese anti-aircraft fire on March 3, 1945. A chill went down Bruce's spine. The story fit his son's nightmares perfectly. He later tracked down the official aircraft action report from that mission. It showed the flight formations of Houston's squadron, and flying right next to James Houston's plane was a pilot named Jack Larson. Every single bizarre, specific detail his toddler had mentioned, the Corsair, the Natoma Bay, the death at Iwo Jima, his friend Jack Larson, it was all there in the historical record. Section 4. The climax of validation. For Bruce Leininger, confirming Jack Larson's name was the final straw. His skepticism didn't just shatter, it was obliterated. In its place was a conviction that something profound was happening. He even managed to find Jack Larson, still alive, who confirmed more details about James Houston's life and death. But the most stunning validation came from the fallen pilot's own family. Bruce located James Houston's living sister, Ann Barron. In their first phone call, she listened patiently as Bruce told her the incredible story of his son's nightmares. She then confirmed numerous personal details James had mentioned, things that weren't in any public record and that only her brother could have known. Eventually, the Leiningers met Ann in person. At the meeting, little James seemed to recognize people and places from Houston's life, identifying items in old photos with an unnerving sense of familiarity. When he met the elderly veterans from the USS Natoma Bay, he reportedly knew them by name, sadly noting how old they all looked, because he remembered them as young men. This entire ordeal transformed the Leininger family. They went from being devout Christians who couldn't stomach the idea of reincarnation to becoming its most public champions. They documented their story in the book Soul Survivor. What began as a private family crisis was now one of the world's most famous cases for the idea that a soul can, and does, live more than once. Section 5. The expert endorsement. The Leininger story might sound like a 1 in a billion fluke, but it's actually part of a huge body of academic research. This field was pioneered by the late Dr. Ian Stevenson at the University of Virginia's Division of Perceptual Studies. For over 40 years, Stevenson investigated more than 2,500 cases of children from all over the world who spontaneously remembered past lives. His method wasn't about hypnosis or leading questions. It was about carefully documenting and verifying what these kids said. His successor, Dr. Jim B. Tucker, a child psychiatrist, has continued this work, bringing a focus to American cases like James Leininger's. Tucker considers the Leininger case one of the strongest ever recorded, mainly because so many of James's most specific statements were documented before anyone had ever heard of James Houston. That timeline is crucial, as it makes it much harder to argue it was all a coincidence, or that the family made it up after the fact. Dr. Tucker's research has uncovered some fascinating patterns. In about 70% of these cases, the children recall dying a violent or unexpected death, just like James. Many also have phobias that seem linked to how they died, like a fear of water in a child who remembers drowning. Another incredible pattern is the presence of birthmarks or birth defects that match the wounds of the deceased person. While James Leininger didn't have these marks, their existence in other cases adds a physical dimension to the verbal memories. This decades-long research suggests that what happened to the Leiningers wasn't just a miracle, but part of a genuine and recurring human experience. Section 6. Criticisms and alternative explanations. Now, a story this wild is going to attract some serious skepticism, and for good reason. Critics have offered several alternative explanations for the James Leininger case. The most common is cryptomnesia, the idea that James was accidentally exposed to information about World War II, maybe from a TV show or a book, then forgot where he heard it and wove it into an elaborate fantasy. Philosopher Michael Sudduth is a major critic of the case. He argues that the Leiningers' story has changed over time, and that they may have unintentionally coached James with details as they did their own research. Sudduth believes the narrative isn't as solid as it seems, and that the parents' testimony has credibility issues. However, Dr. Jim Tucker has published detailed rebuttals to these points. He stands by the core evidence, especially the statements that were documented on paper and in an unaired TV interview before James Houston was identified. Tucker also points out that while you can never completely rule out a hoax, the Leiningers had no obvious motive to create such an elaborate lie from the very beginning. Plus, the sheer unlikeliness of a toddler correctly guessing the combination of a Corsair, the Natoma Bay, Iwo Jima, and Jack Larson makes pure coincidence a statistical longshot. The debate is fierce, but proponents argue that while there's no smoking gun, reincarnation is simply the most logical explanation for the mountain of circumstantial evidence. The story of James Leininger makes you wonder, is it possible that our consciousness, our soul, doesn't just wink out of existence when we die? We've looked at the clues, the investigation, and the counter-arguments. Now it's your turn. Do you think a child can really remember a life they lived before? Let us know what you think in the comments. Conclusion. As James Leininger got older, the sharp, terrifying memories of being a pilot began to fade. Researchers say this is a common pattern in these cases. Today, he's a young man living a normal life, and the echoes of that World War II pilot are now just a quiet, strange part of his history. No, this case doesn't offer absolute 100% proof of reincarnation. Science, as it currently exists, doesn't have the tools to measure or test a soul. But the Leininger story, with its documented facts, skeptical parents, and striking similarities to thousands of other cases, presents a powerful challenge to the idea that we are just our physical bodies. It suggests that memory might be more than brain chemistry, and that our identity might be more than a single lifetime. It leaves us with a tantalizing possibility that the end of one life isn't an ending at all, but just turning the page to the next chapter. Your soul may have lived before, And somewhere deep down, it still remembers.